It was the early 1910s in New York City, a time when gaslights still flickered along cobblestone streets, and the hum of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the new sound of automobiles. The city was alive with faith and fear, with dreams and sins, and in the midst of it all stood the towering churches that watched over their flocks like silent sentinels. To many, these sacred places were the heart of moral order, sanctuaries where darkness could not enter. But sometimes, evil doesn't knock on the door. Sometimes it preaches from the pulpit. That was the disturbing truth that would soon grip New York. A story so horrifying it would leave both parishioners and police questioning how something so sinister could exist within the holy walls of the church. The man at the center of it all was Father Hans Schmidt, a respected Catholic priest whose charming smile and calm demeanor masked one of the most gruesome crimes in early 20th century America. In 1913, a young woman named Anna Müller, a parish housekeeper of German descent, vanished from her Manhattan apartment. When dismembered remains later surfaced in the Hudson River, police followed a trail that led not to a career criminal or a desperate lover, but to a man of God, a priest who had secretly married his victim and then murdered her in cold blood. The crime shocked a nation built on faith. Newspapers called it a tale of madness cloaked in holiness. Others whispered that Schmidt's actions weren't merely human evil, but something darker, something otherworldly. And yet, even after his confession and conviction, questions remained. Was Father Schmidt truly a deranged killer acting alone? Or was he, as he claimed, obeying a divine command? As the investigation unfolded, it revealed a chilling descent into obsession, delusion, and religious hypocrisy. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't hiding in the shadows, they're standing at the altar. This is the true crime story of Father Hans Schmidt, a priest turned killer, and a case that still haunts the history of New York's underbelly. But what drives a man of God to commit murder? And how did no one see it coming? To understand the tragedy that would unfold, we must first step back, before the scandal, before the headlines, to see who these two people really were. Father Hans Schmidt and Anna Müller. Hans Schmidt was born in 1881 in Aschaffenburg, Germany, a devout Catholic boy raised in a strict household where religion was both a comfort and a cage. From a young age, Hans felt drawn to the rituals of the church, the incense, the hymns, the glow of candlelight flickering against stained glass. But alongside his devotion, there was something else, a fascination with sacrifice, suffering, and blood. He once told a childhood friend that he believed God sometimes required pain to show love. That belief, dark as it sounds, would one day take a horrifying turn. After years of study, Hans was ordained as a priest. Those who met him described him as intelligent, soft-spoken, and intensely passionate in his sermons. He came to America in the early 1900s, eventually serving at St. Boniface Church in New York City, where he quickly earned the respect of his congregation. But beneath his priestly robes, Hans carried secrets, a troubled mind, a hunger for control, and an obsession with purity and sin. Then there was Anna Müller, a young German immigrant who had come to New York seeking opportunity. She worked as a housekeeper at St. Boniface Church, where she first met Father Schmidt. Anna was kind-hearted and devout, but also full of quiet ambition, the kind of woman who believed she could build a better life in America. Friends described her as cheerful, polite, and deeply trusting. It was within the church walls, a place meant for faith, that their relationship began. What started as spiritual guidance soon crossed forbidden boundaries. Despite the church's vow of celibacy, Hans and Anna's connection grew into something far more intimate. In secret, he even performed their own wedding ceremony, declaring himself both priest and groom. It should have been a story of love and redemption, two souls seeking solace in one another. But instead, it became a story of obsession, betrayal, and death, because in the end, what Hans called love may have been something else entirely. It was early September of 1913, a humid, uneasy stretch of days in New York City, when summer refused to give way to fall. For most people, life continued as normal. Streetcars rattled through the avenues, children played near the East River, and workers crowded the docks. But inside a small apartment on Bradhurst Avenue, the air was thick with something else, something darker. Father Hans Schmidt and Anna Amler had recently moved into that apartment, away from the church where they had met. Their relationship, hidden for months, had become strained. Anna was several months pregnant, a fact that terrified Schmidt. To him, the pregnancy was proof of his sin, a living reminder that he had broken his vows to God. To Anna, it was a promise of a future, one she hoped might finally be free from secrecy. On the evening of September 2nd, 1913, neighbors recalled hearing muffled, arguing coming from the Schmidt apartment. A woman's voice, calm but firm, was heard saying something about leaving, about starting fresh. Then silence. Around 9 p.m., a light flickered in the window. Later, the faint scent of something burning drifted from the chimney. The next morning, Hans was seen leaving the building, wearing a long overcoat despite the warm weather. He carried 2 heavy bundles wrapped in brown paper. A neighbor thought it strange, the way he moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, but assumed it was none of his business. That same day, just before dawn, a gruesome discovery was made along the banks of the Hudson River near the 152nd Street dock. A tugboat operator spotted a strange package floating near the shoreline. Inside was the torso of a young woman, neatly wrapped in bedsheets. The head, arms, and legs were missing. Within hours, another package was found downstream, then another. The city's newspapers would soon call it the dismemberment murder. But for now, police had no name for their victim. No one knew who she was, where she had come from, or who had done this. Meanwhile, Hans Schmidt returned to his duties at St. Joseph's Church in Harlem, as though nothing had happened. Parishioners recalled that his sermons that week were unusually intense, fixated on sin, punishment, and redemption. One even remembered him saying, "Through blood, the soul is cleansed." At the time, it sounded like scripture. Later, it would sound like a confession. Days passed, and more of Anna's remains surfaced along the river. Her head was eventually found, and it didn't take long before someone recognized her face. The discovery would set off a citywide investigation, one that peeled away the mask of a man who claimed to serve God and revealed a killer lurking beneath the collar. But how could a priest, a man of faith, commit such an unspeakable act? That's the question that haunted New York, and it's the one that still lingers today. The calm of early September 1913 was broken by a discovery so macabre it sent shivers through New York City's collective conscience. It began when a tugboat crew, navigating the Hudson River near West 152nd Street, noticed something drifting through the fog, a large waterlogged parcel, bound tightly in linen and coarse twine. Thinking it was waste from one of the nearby slaughterhouses, they moved closer, curious. But as they hoisted it onto the deck, the weight and shape told them something was wrong. When the bundle was torn open, a horrifying truth emerged. Inside was the torso of a young woman, cleanly severed and drained of blood. The body had been wrapped carefully, almost reverently, as if the killer wanted to conceal their crime, but couldn't bring themselves to destroy the evidence entirely. The marks on the body were deliberate, surgical even, and whoever had done it had known precisely what they were doing. Police arrived quickly, led by Captain Arthur Carey of the NYPD's Homicide Division. The torso was taken to the city morgue, and word spread like wildfire. Soon, reporters crowded the riverbank, scribbling headlines that would horrify readers the next morning. Woman's body found in river, a fiendish crime uncovered. Over the next 2 days, more packages appeared, each containing different parts of the same woman. Then, the final piece ahead surfaced near the shore. The coroner's office identified her as Anna Müller, a 21-year-old woman of German descent who had recently worked as a housekeeper at a rectory in Harlem. The neighborhood fell into stunned silence. Anna had been well liked, known for her quiet nature and her devotion to her faith. No one could imagine who would wish her harm, or why, but the sheets used to wrap her remains held the first real clue. They bore a monogram traced to St. Boniface Church, where a certain priest had recently ordered identical linens. And so, the trail of horror began to lead not into the city's underworld, but straight toward the pulpit. When the news broke that the remains of Anna Müller had been identified, detectives from the New York Police Department quickly realized this was no ordinary case. A woman brutally murdered, dismembered, and placed in a river. It reeked of both rage and calculation. The brutality suggested a crime of passion, yet the precision of the cuts hinted at someone with anatomical knowledge, perhaps even medical or clerical training. It didn't take long before investigators turned their eyes toward one of the least likely suspects imaginable, Father Hans Schmidt, a Catholic priest from St. Boniface Church. At first, the very idea seemed absurd. A priest committing such an atrocity? But as investigators dug deeper, the calm, soft-spoken clergyman's facade began to crack. Detectives soon uncovered evidence linking Schmidt directly to Anna. They learned the two had been romantically involved, a forbiddance relationship that would have scandalized both the church and the faithful community of Manhattan. Witnesses recalled seeing the pair together on numerous occasions, and Schmidt himself had secretly performed a marriage ceremony between the two in his apartment, though it had no legal or religious validity. The police searched Schmidt's quarters at St. Boniface, and what they found left even the most hardened detectives cold. Bloodstains were discovered on the mattress, and a blood-soaked saw and knife were recovered tools that, according to the coroner, matched the clean, deliberate cuts made to Anna's body. The priest didn't deny knowing Anna, but when questioned about the evidence, his answers became inconsistent and evasive. As the investigation deepened, a darker picture began to emerge. Detectives learned Schmidt had a troubled past in Germany, where he had already been reprimanded for inappropriate behavior with women and even for counterfeiting money. The church had quietly transferred him to the United States in hopes of avoiding further scandal, a decision that, in hindsight, would have tragic consequences. But what truly unsettled investigators wasn't just the physical evidence. It was Schmidt's demeanor, calm, detached, at times even eerily serene. He didn't seem to fear arrest or judgment. Instead, he spoke of divine voices, of destiny, and of being chosen to shed blood in the name of God. As the investigation into Anna Müller's murder unfolded, detectives found themselves facing an increasingly bizarre and disturbing puzzle. While Father Hans Schmidt quickly emerged as the prime suspect, the police initially explored other possibilities, partly because no one wanted to believe that a priest could be capable of such savagery. At first, investigators considered whether Anna might have been targeted by someone from outside the church. She had recently been working as a housekeeper for the parish, and her warm personality had attracted attention from several parishioners. Some suggested that an obsessed admirer or a jealous rival could have been responsible. Others whispered about possible connections to her past in Germany, perhaps a lover or acquaintance who had followed her across the Atlantic. But as more clues surfaced, the focus inevitably shifted back to Father Schmidt. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence came from a local store clerk who recalled selling a large, sharp knife and saw to a man matching Schmidt's description just days before the murder. When police examined the priest's apartment, they discovered receipts confirming the purchase. Alongside these, They found fragments of burned clothing in the fireplace, likely Anna's, and a small bottle of chloroform. Even stranger, investigators found handwritten notes tucked inside. Schmidt's prayer books, passages where biblical scripture had been altered to justify acts of sacrifice. These writings portrayed a deeply disturbed man who seemed to believe he was chosen by God to purify through blood. When questioned, Schmidt's demeanor was unsettlingly calm. He spoke in riddles, alternating between moments of lucidity and cryptic declarations about divine love and punishment. Witnesses from the parish described how he had been increasingly erratic in the weeks before the murder, delivering passionate sermons about sin, redemption, and suffering. The most baffling discovery, however, came from a second apartment Schmidt had rented under a false name. There, police found a printing press used to counterfeit money, evidence of an entirely separate crime, suggesting that his life as a priest had been nothing more than an elaborate disguise. Each new clue painted a portrait not of a man of God, but of someone living a double life, one defined by deceit, obsession, and delusion. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, Schmidt continued to insist that he had done nothing wrong, that everything he had done was, in his words, for the glory of God. But was he insane? Or was that claim just another layer of manipulation from a man who had mastered deception, both in the pulpit and beyond? By the time Father Hans Schmidt stood trial in late 1913, the courtroom was overflowing with spectators. Reporters filled every bench, sketching his solemn face as he took his seat before the judge. Dressed in his priest's collar, Schmidt appeared calm, almost detached, as the charges of first-degree murder were read aloud. The prosecution wasted no time painting him as a manipulative killer who had used religion to hide his monstrous impulses. The evidence against him was damning. Witnesses described his volatile relationship with Anna Ammeler, the young woman he had secretly married. Police presented the blood-stained saw, the forged marriage certificate, and testimony linking Schmidt to the very apartment where the murder occurred. It was a chilling display of both passion and premeditation, and the public watched, riveted, as the story unfolded like a Gothic tragedy. But Schmidt's defense told a different story. His lawyers argued that he was mentally unstable, claiming he suffered from religious delusions. Schmidt himself insisted that God had commanded him to make a blood sacrifice, a statement that sent gasps rippling through the courtroom. Some observers whispered that he was insane, while others saw a cold, calculating man trying to escape the gallows. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just over an hour. On February 5, 1914, Father Hans Schmidt was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. When asked if he had any final words, he simply replied, "I am happy to die." And yet, even after his execution at Sing Sing prison later that year, questions lingered. Was Schmidt truly insane, or had he used madness as a mask? Were there other crimes he had committed before coming to New York? Police across Europe quietly reopened unsolved cases connected to churches where he had once served. In the end, Schmidt took those answers with him to the grave, leaving behind not closure, but silence. More than 100 years have passed since Father Hans Schmidt met his end in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Yet his story refuses to fade into history. It lingers, not only because of the horror of the crime itself, but because of the contradictions it revealed within one man. How could a priest, a man who stood before the altar preaching purity and salvation, harbor such darkness within him? How could faith and murder coexist in the same soul? For many, the case of Father Schmidt was more than just another early 20th century murder. It was a mirror held up to society's faith in institutions that were supposed to be beyond corruption. His double life, a priest by day, a murderer by night, forced the public to confront a chilling truth. evil can sometimes wear the robes of holiness. His story became a cautionary tale, not just about crime, but about misplaced trust and the dangers of blind faith. Even after his execution, questions persisted. Was Anna Amler his only victim? Some historians and criminologists argue that the answer might be no. Before arriving in New York, Schmidt had served in several parishes across Germany and Austria. And in the years following his conviction, European investigators began re-examining unsolved crimes in those areas. There were reports of young women who vanished under mysterious circumstances, women connected, in one way or another, to local churches or parishes Schmidt had served. None of the cases were ever conclusively tied to him, but the pattern was disturbing. Could Father Schmidt have been a serial killer long before Anna's tragic death? Others questioned Schmidt's mental state. His courtroom ramblings about hearing the voice of God and being chosen for a holy mission left many wondering if he was insane or simply using religion as a cover for his monstrous desires. Psychologists later examined his case as an example of religious delusion, masking sociopathic tendencies, a man who manipulated faith itself to justify his acts, even today. The story of Father Hans Schmidt continues to haunt true crime enthusiasts and theologians alike. His name surfaces in documentaries, books, and university lectures, not as a sensational figure, but as a chilling symbol of human duality. The Hudson River, where Anna's remains were found, still runs quietly past the city it once trembled at the revelation of a priest-turned-killer. And perhaps the most unsettling question that remains is this: how many others like him walked among the faithful, hiding behind the cloth, unseen and unrepentant? In that lingering doubt lies the true horror of Father Hans Schmidt's legacy, a story that reminds us that sometimes the darkest shadows fall where the light is meant to shine the brightest. If you found this story as haunting as we did, consider subscribing and sharing it to help keep these voices from fading into silence. After all, sometimes remembering is the closest thing to justice we have left.